Evil isn't the real to the world. Stupid is just as destructive as evil. Maybe more so. It's a hell of a lot more common. What we really need is a crusade against stupid. It actually might the difference. A very good morning to you all, ladies and gentlemen. Also, good afternoon and good evening to the other parts of the world. When we talk in literature, we generally include the Western literature broadly in general. This opens up the possibilities of a whole new experience and wide diversity. It's also something which is fascinating and engrossing at the same time. But all this sound quite mundane, all this sound quite commonplace. What we have today is quite interesting. When I use today, I refer to the lecture, and it will deal with the associated stupidity in modern European literature. To deliver the talk, we have someone who really does not need an introduction. He is Dr. Bibhash Choudhury. We all know him. Just to brief you all about him, Dr. Bibhash Choudhury is a professor in English at Gauhati University. His publications include English Social Cultural History, Beyond Cartography, the Contemporary South Asian Novel in English, and Reading Post-Colonial Theory. He is currently the literary editor, Assamese, of the online journal Muse India. Sir, we are absolutely honored to host you here, and AIFEST is really indebted to you for having accepted our invitation. We are really waiting for your talk. Over to you, Bibhash sir.
Thank you so much, Abhilash. The subject that we have before us today, stupidity in modern European literature, is, when you look at it at first instance, appears to be something that begs the question, can there be something called stupidity, or can there be something that can be the subject of what is called serious literature? Now, to come to that question, we need to look at some of these European texts, writings by different European writers. And in my deliberation today, I'll be looking at some familiar texts and some slightly marginal texts, and try to look at how this whole idea of stupidity actually occupies a place of importance in European literature. And also, the question, what is stupidity? Is there something called stupidity? And how is it different from other concepts in philosophy, aesthetics, and literature? The first text that I'd like to refer to was published in 1924. This text is a long short story by the Estonian writer Friedbert Douglas. Friedbert Douglas was someone who was a kind of a maverick. He was someone who moved about different places and had a very, very strong European inheritance in terms of his reading. So in this long short story called The Poet and the Idiot, so there are basically two characters, the poet and the idiot. And in this long short story, which was written in the during 1917-18, but subsequently published in 1924. In this story, I just spell out the outline of the story so that we can look at its implications. In this story, we have a poet, a very well-established poet called Ormuzan. Ormuzan is sitting in a park in Tartu. So he sees, as he's sitting there, a man approach him. Man goes by, passes him by, and the man comes back. And then he says, Ormuzan. Of course, Ormuzan is surprised. who is this man? He looks like a tramp. He's not well dressed. His whole appearance is ungainly. So this man says, I sat with you at the same bench. And then Ormuzon recalls that this man is called Cobras. His name is Cobras. So he says, oh, you're Cobras? He said, yes. So he says, I have been meaning to talk to you for many years. I've thought about it and I've followed you. And now my theory is ripe. And now I'm going to tell you. You'll have to help me. Now, of course, Ormuzon is irritated. This man, who was his friend, classmate once, has long been away, and he did not agree with any of the parameters of life that Ormuzon believed in. He was a poet, very well-established poet. So he found this a hindrance. Now, gradually, Cobra started talking to him and saying that I'm going to tell you a story. Please listen to me. Ormuzon had no option. Now, in this case, if you read the story, we realize that it is somewhat similar to the Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Coleridge, the opening space where the ancient mariner gets hold of the wedding guest and says, tells him, stops him, and says, you must listen to my story. So Ormuzon similarly has no option. He starts listening, and gradually as the story is unraveled, Ormuzon is transfixed. He cannot get out of it. What is the story? The story is not actually a story of characters. It is actually a proposition or the presentation of a particular idea. What is this idea? Cobras says that, you see, there is a problem, and this is a problem. It's a human problem, and this is a problem I have been trying to deal with all my life. And now I know that I have found a solution. So he comes to the whole idea of divinity and God. He says that, you see, the whole idea of God and divinity, there's a huge problem. Ormuzon asks why? And he says the main problem is that it is very fixed. There is no way to move out. And then he starts talking of the history of Christianity, but it's a very, very different kind of Christianity. He says that there is the whole idea of God, and it is more or less regimented in the eyes of the believers. But the idea of the devil gives you complete license to do whatever you want. You can imagine the devil as someone you hate, as someone you would destroy, as someone you turn to. The devil does not interrupt. The devil doesn't say anything. The devil is tolerant. And there is no question of conformity in the way you can imagine the devil. So his proposition is that it appears to be a kind of idiocy. This whole idea of God being so fixed. Now, you see, what Friedberg Douglass does here, he completely reverses the idea of idiocy. At first instance, we see this man, Cobras, as an idiot. He's an idiot. He's a buffoon. He's someone you'd stay away from. Now, what he proposes, he's actually proposing a civilizational overhaul. He's saying that this whole idea of civilization is predicated upon the understanding of progress and conformity. The key word is conformity. That you must conform, you must be correct, you must follow the path, you must do these things in this manner. So this predication of a particular pattern, however that pattern may be reworked according to a national circumstance. What emerges here, Cobras's view is that it is something that does not allow you to move out. And he sees that to be a kind of idiocy. He doesn't use the word idiocy, he sees it a kind of stupidity, because what he suggests is that, see, he's going to the whole idea of stupidity. So what is the standard commonplace understanding of stupidity? That, oh, so and so is a stupid person, that there is a problem with intelligence of cognitive value. So that person is stupid and that person cannot receive beyond the point. So the whole idea of a stupid person, or whole concept of stupidity, is actually a very fixated frame. Now what Cobras does here is to use this whole idea and say, see, your idea of God is fixed. That you don't have anything to move beyond that frame. If you move beyond the frame, then you violate. That means just as a stupid person is perceived to be very limited and conditioned by a particular frame to which that person is associated, with which that person is associated. In a similar manner, the idea of divinity is transfixed. And he talks about national icons, different locations, and how these different ideas of divinity in different cultures are formulated. But he says that doesn't matter. So Ormuzon asks him, why have you come to me? He says, you are a poet. You are a great aestheticizer. So you can write. I cannot write. I cannot express. You will have to write this. You'll have to let it know. You have to let this out to the world. The people must understand that they are actually promoting something in the name of civilization, something which is actually nothing but idiocy or stupidity, or a very, very fixated condition of conformity. Now, why is this a very, very interesting text in terms of how it looks at the question of stupidity? Because, first of all, in this text, in Douglas's text, we find that there are two philosophical, conceptual, intellectual positions pitted against each other. And throughout the story, Ormuzon leaves the park, and subsequently he goes to his place. Cobras comes and meets him again. That is not very significant here. But what matters here is that the idea of conformity, an idea of departure, this is connected to not civilization, not progress, not intellectual movement, but a kind of fixity that has not changed. Cobras asks and says, he asks Ormuzon, has it changed for all these years? No, it hasn't. The same idea of divinity, same idea of God. So he takes this as an example. He takes this as an example of the kind of stupidity that is in circulation as a civilizational discourse in society, in Western society, to which people subscribe and they conform to it. But Cobras's contention is that this is a kind of stupidity, and it is not something that would give you the scope to be creative. You'll have to be the same person as a believer. So the problem with belief is that it binds you, it holds you, it fixates you to a system. Now, of course, as you can make out, the name cobras is symbolic, because cobras is connected to this satanic idea of the snake at Eden, the Garden of Eden. But the argument of the story, the philosophical contention of the story, is very interesting. And what it does is to transform this whole idea of stupidity into something which is worth considering, because it is not separate from intelligence, but is actually taken to be a representation of intelligence which has been misread throughout Western civilization. The whole idea that that Western civilization has progressed from one point to another, this whole idea is actually based on a very, very fixated notion that you cannot move out of this frame, whatever you do. Now we can also see in this context that what Cobras is suggesting is a kind of elasticity which would give us the freedom to move out of a frame. The moment you stick to a frame, you're bound to it. So he says that look at the devil. The whole idea of the devil is fascinating. In Western civilization, the idea of the devil is fascinating because it provides us the scope to look at it in innumerable ways. So he doesn't quite look at the idea of the devil as evil. No, he doesn't make it a moral equation. He's not looking at devil as evil. He's taking the idea of the devil as a metaphor. And in taking the devil as a metaphor, he's arguing that here is a situation where non-conformity gives the license to imagine and to determine things differently. So what we see here in this text is that the commonplace idea of stupidity, so there's the irony of the title. The poet, who is a celebrated poet, who is very well known, who is intellectually very superior, he's an achiever, he's socially settled, he's recognized, and against him, pitted against him, is this other person, the idiot, who is dressed shabbily, who is speaking apparently nonsense, what he is talking about actually doesn't make any sense. What is he talking about? So that commonplace is overturned inside the story by the idiot, where he points out to Ormson, it is you. It is your stupidity, your conformity, your fixity. So this is not stated directly, but this is implied. And in his conversation, he makes it clear that you are a failure. You have failed. Your whole idea of civilizational progress has failed. So these two very, very commonly associated characteristics with stupidity. One is that a stupid person is a failure, is a social failure, and the stupid person cannot go beyond the point. So these two characteristics, Cobras, in a very, very reverse manner, associates with one of the major writers of Estonia. Ormson is, of course, fictional, but he's the major writer, major poet of Estonia. And he says that you are a failure. So we see here a very, very interesting dimension of stupidity. Now, 1924 was an important year for another text which was published. This is a Czech text by Jaroslav Hasek called The Good Soldier Swike. Now, The Good Soldier Swike is apparently, or that is how it is very, very commonly read, is a comic novel. There is this soldier, not actually a soldier, but he's a policeman and a soldier, and he finds himself in very, very complicated situations. And there's a lot of wit generated. And the reader has this perception that this man, Swike, finds himself in these very difficult situations, he wriggles out of them and makes a fool of himself. He's seen by everyone, wherever he goes, as a stupid person. Now, this text is interesting for another reason. It's a very different text from the text by Douglas. Good Soldier Swike is we know that Hasek could not complete the novel. He could not finish it. So he passed away before he could finish it. So we have actually a partial text. But what we have in Good Soldier Swike is the generation of a lot of incidents where the primary condition is play. What is this idea of play? This idea of play is the moment the people make fun of Swike, the moment they make fun of Swike, the reader immediately realizes, it becomes apparent to the reader that they are not only making fun of him, they are making fun of themselves. So what happens is, because this is generated by a very, very important device used by Hasek, and that is the device of the effect. It is something that we find discussed by critics like Julia Kristeva. The effect. That means Swike is always smiling. He remains unaffected. He always remains unaffected. However the crisis, whatever the situation, whatever the loss of public reputation and image, whether he's made fun of all the time. And he finds himself in all these very clumsy situations. And there are these very, very intelligent people, very sober people, very, very caring people. Some people look at him kindly. But he stands apart as the epitome of stupidity. Now, when we read this novel, when we read Hasek, we find that the fun generated is double-edged. The fun, so-called fun, because it's a very, very witty, engrossing novel. Every situation, it's an episodic novel. Every situation talks about something that is what is called ludicrous. But we know that the word ludic is associated with the condition of play. So, what Hasek was trying to do, he's not only playing with the circumstance, he's also playing with the perception of the reader. So the reader cannot but look at things from the general perception of stupidity and at the same time look at Swike and really admire his equanimity, that he's unruffled. And why is he unruffled? That's the point. Why is Swike all the time unruffled in spite of everyone calling him in different situations a stupid person? That response mechanism through which Swike is identified, that is something Hasek was trying to present. That if someone calls you a stupid person, how are you going to respond? Because, see, what he does here is, if he had not been a stupid person, so-called stupid person, he would have thought about it. Why are people talking about me like this? Why are people reacting to me like this? So since he's stupid, so apparently since he is unable to address these issues, he remains unruffled. So what is actually a drawback in terms of his intelligence becomes his greatest strength. But because he remains who he is, he can be unruffled. He doesn't change. So he is one of the great comic characters of European literature, Good Soldier Spike. Now what happens here is, see, he is seen as stupid. He behaves as if he's stupid. He doesn't think twice about who he is and how he's perceived. And nothing changes for him. In a way, you'll find situations where people are frustrated with him. But why does he not react? So stupidity as a form of irritation, as a form of frustration, as a form of self-deprecation is overturned here in Hasek's novel. And it becomes the agency of presenting the conversation with society. That here is the question of stupidity and here is the question of society. Now, I would like to move to my other text, a slightly different text, which is not seen as a text associated with stupidity, but I'm trying to look at this whole idea or concept of stupidity and extend it to some other texts. There's a text by a short story by Albert Camus called The Guest. Now, this was published in 1957 in the collection Exile and the Kingdom. The same year he got the Nobel Prize. The Guest is often read, and this is how people look at it. They look at it as a political story. They look at it as a story that deals with Camus' own dilemma of dual identity, of being a Frenchman and also being an Algerian, and the Algerian War of Independence, and him being a Frenchman, and him being caught in these two wars. So what is this story? It's a very, very short story. One day, a man called Balducci brings an Arab. So this connects to the Algerian situation, but I'm not going to look at it as a political narrative. That is something which is how the story is read as. I'm going to look at it as an example of how a situation gives a person a sense of being stupid. So Balducci arrives in a school with an Arab. He's a prisoner. And the school is closed because there's a blizzard. And so there's a man called Daru who is in that school. So the job of Balducci was to bring this man here and keep him here. And the next step is that of Daru, to hand him over to the authorities. So what Daru does, he asks, what has this man done? He says, this man has killed his cousin. He slit his cousin's throat. Is he a bad man? No, we don't know. So Balducci leaves. This man, the Arab, stays with Daru for the night. And in the morning, it was Daru's job to hand him over to the authorities. So he doesn't do that. He gives 1,000 francs to this prisoner and says, if you go this way, that is where the authorities are. And if you go the other way, you'll find in nomadic tribes, and then you will get your freedom. The Arab leaves. The Arab goes Daru is watching, but he goes to the authorities. And he comes back, the school is empty. In the school board, there is this sentence being written: "You have handed me over, you will pay." Now, what strikes Daru, the story ends there. What strikes Daru is that he has handed him over, but he hasn't. So, there is a kind of stupidity, a kind of helplessness that doesn't come from lack of knowledge, that doesn't come from people calling you stupid, but he feels that he is stupid. He feels he's stupid. He feels he is completely helpless in spite of his intentions. He could not change the man. So, of course, when you read a text by Camus, there are so many implications. It is taken to be one of the important stories dealing with existentialism. But you can see that the whole sense of not being able to move. But when he saw it on the board, he was unable to move. It's something that stayed with him. But I am helpless. That all my knowledge, all my desire to see him free has resulted in nothing. Now, as we see that there is writing, creative writing, literature on stupidity, there have been very, very interesting theories on this idea of stupidity. J.B. Erdman, in 1866, J.B. Erdman is one of the major Hegelians. He was a Hegelian philosopher. So he wrote an essay called, in 1866, called On Stupidity. And when he was preparing it and when it came out in the public domain, and he was also talking about it, people started laughing. Can you talk about something called stupidity? What is there to talk about? Now, this Erdman example, what Erdman talks about, we'll come to that a little later. This Erdman example is taken up by the novelist Robert Musil. Robert Musil, in an essay called On Stupidity, published in 1937, quotes Erdman. And he says, the problem with the idea of stupidity, the moment I take up the subject of stupidity, I'm going to talk of stupidity, there is this assumption that I am clever. I am not stupid. I'm going to talk about stupidity, but I am not stupid. How do I disengage this idea that I am clever, I am not stupid, and I can talk about stupidity? This was, he says, this was the problem faced by Erdman. Because Erdman was looking at the whole commonplace, that stupidity is seen as lack of intelligence. So Musil said that we have to move beyond it. And Musil made a very important point. He says that stupidity is seen as a kind of deafness, lack of hearing. Not in the physiological sense, not that a person is unable to hear, he has problem. No. The stupid person in society is taken to be one who has a problem of reception. The stupid person cannot receive. This is the point made by Musil. Now, this essay has been approached, looked at, debated in the discourse of stupidity in Western literature. It was not published in 1937. The English translation came out in 1990, but subsequently, a lot of critics, thinkers, philosophers started talking of this. And in 2002, Avital Ronell published a book called Stupidity. And there she talks about stupidity as that rhetoric of testing, that it is a process of evaluation, that you are evaluated in terms of who you are. The word stupid may not be used, but you are evaluated in terms of who you are. So it becomes the whole paradigm of stupidity becomes a rhetoric of testing. This is what Avital Ronald says, that it becomes a rhetoric of testing, that our assessment of the other, is that person up to me, is the person equal of me, is the person superior to me in intelligence. So these things don't require statement, that they are part of the social discourse. So the whole idea of stupidity need not be presented as something that is visible or apparent. So Avital Ronald talks of the dimensions of stupidity in terms of how they occupy the public space without people even recognizing, but engaging in it all the time. The engagement takes place all the time. This is the process of othering, the process of evaluation that takes place all the time. So Avital Ronald talks of a lot of things. She talks of how the perception boils down to the person's appearance, dress, speech, looks, personality, presentation, company. So this becomes a rhetoric of testing in the sense that you immediately arrive at the main point about stupidity, arrive at a judgment. So stupidity is judgmental, that you judge someone. A stupid person is judged as stupid. Now, one of the classic examples of judgment of a person, that this person is stupid, that this person is an idiot, that this person does not have the intelligence. So you can say that this person doesn't know the ways of the world. Sometimes naivety and innocence are also connected to stupidity. And one of the classic examples of this perception, that stupidity is to be seen like this, one of the classic examples is The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now, in this novel, there is this character called Prince Mishkin. Prince Mishkin finds himself in a situation where everyone thinks that he's too good. He's too good. He's so innocent. He doesn't know the ways of the world. He doesn't understand the intricacies of relationships. He doesn't understand how he is being used, how people take advantage of who he is and what his position is. So here, the whole idea of idiot in Dostoevsky, the idiot in Dostoevsky is not connected to lack of intelligence, but lack of understanding the ways of the world. We have a lot of complicated characters in the novel. Characters who challenge and provoke Mishkin. He remains steadfast. So this is one of the perceptions of stupidity, in the sense that here it becomes a virtue. That this man is perceived as stupid, perceived to be the idiot, but this is his virtue. He is the one who unwaveringly sticks to his path, unchanged. He is the person he was, and he remains. This idea, as we can see here, this idea of stupidity of idiocy is not similar to foolishness. The idea of foolishness is slightly different, and we have a very, very long comic tradition in Europe. We can go back to Don Quixote, we can go to Rabelais, and of course, coming down to the 20th century, we have this long comic tradition in both European continental literature and English literature with the idea of the fool. Here, Mishkin is not the fool. He is fool in a different sense, in the sense that he is incapable of seeing the devious ways of society and people. He is incapable. Now this idea that human beings can look at people through different categories, the stupid person, the intelligent person, the foolish man or woman, but human beings alone can do that, has been the subject of a very, very interesting philosophical debate in European philosophy. In 1968, Gilles Deleuze published a book called Difference and Repetition. And he came up with a very, very interesting idea, something which people had not talked about, not referred to. And we know that there have been different definitions of the condition of being human. Who is a human being? So Deleuze, in that book, argued that human beings have devised for themselves this whole idea of stupidity and intelligence. But we can't say the same of animals. We can't say this is an intelligent animal and a stupid animal. We can't say that of the same species. We can say this species as such is intelligent. So he makes a very, very interesting distinction in terms of the framework through which people place this whole idea of stupidity. He takes it outside the human frame and he says, see, this is a question of looking at stupidity as only being human. Not only human beings can be stupid. But human beings can be intelligent, but only human beings can be stupid. So human beings have devised for themselves something that we do not find anywhere in the world. Now, when Deleuze published this, and of course, Difference and Repetition is a book that deals with many other issues, but this idea of Deleuze, of course, brought to view a whole new dimension. Okay, is this a way of looking at things? Jacques Derrida reacted. And he pointed out that, no, it's not like that. It's not so simple. And that Deleuze is ambiguous. In a series of lectures, Derrida pointed out that this Deleuzian idea of stupidity associated with beasts, not because he says that stupidity is associated with, Derrida pointed out, stupidity is associated with beasts as a category. This is a perception that, oh, the animal is stupid. So he pointed out that there is another dimension, that human beings are stupid and intelligent, but human beings overall see the animal as lacking in intelligence. So in that sense, the animal is stupid. Now, this debate, what it brings to mind, I'm reminded of a story by Franz Kafka. It's called The Jackals and the Arabs. The story is that, see, the whole idea of bestiality, of animals being inferior is taken up by Kafka. And you have here in this story the man is a man who we are told comes from the north. The man comes from the north and he meets the Arabs and he stays with the Arabs. And as he's resting, the jackals come. And jackals come and enter and they just sit with him. They start talking to him. And the jackals say that you have to rescue us. You are the one we have been waiting for. You are the one. And you must get rid of the Arabs because they are dangerous. And you must save us. As the jackals are telling the man how the Arabs are dangerous, one Arab comes and is able to, he hears what they are saying, and he brings a camel carcass that has died and he throws it to jackals, and jackals feast on it. And the Arab tells the man, see, the jackals are wonderful. And how they hate us. How they hate us. Now, this whole idea, this is a story that Derrida refers to, that the whole idea of stupidity in terms of animal not being stupid is ambiguous in the Deleuzian formulation. This is what Derrida argues, because he says that in literature or in different discourses, we find that this animal-human division is not rigid. The animality in man, in Kafka, you'll find the animality in man, the animality of the jackals, and of course of the Arabs, and the helplessness, the whole sense of not being able to do anything of this man who comes from the north. This is something which connects us to the idea of being completely fixed and helpless because he can't do anything. The man we found in Camus and this man we have here in Kafka. Now, I would like to go to a text which has throughout from the time of his publication been what is called a super hit. This text was published in 1959 and immediately it became a super hit. It is by Raymond Queneau. It's a French text. It's called Jazzy in the Metro. It's a very playful text. And from what I have gathered, it's written in very playful French. And the translator, Barbara Wright, in the English translation, has more or less successfully carried that playfulness. What is this? What is this text about? There's a young girl, Jazzy, who comes to Paris, and she wants to travel by metro. She comes and meets her uncle, and she says, I want to travel by metro. And her uncle says, no, you can't. Why? Because the metro workers on strike. Today there is no metro. So she is very frustrated. She says, no, I just want to travel by metro. That's the only thing I want. And then it keeps on moving forward. Her uncle Gabriel tries very hard to pacify her, takes her to the coffee shop. They meet different people. They travel by the carriage, but she doesn't find any solace. She's just not concerned about all this. All she wants is to travel by metro. Now, all throughout, she asks certain questions. She asks Gabriel, but who are you? What do you do? Some apparently very idiotic questions. Questions we don't think necessary. Questions we don't think should be asked. Why should someone ask, who are you? Someone you know. What do you do? Now, what Kinu was trying to show here, and this is presented to Gabriel's eyes, he realizes there's a very, very stunning passage on the idea of disappearance. As he is going with his with Jazzy, and there are of course a lot of other people. They meet a policeman, they meet a driver. So as they are going, Gabriel suddenly has a realization that life is nothing but disappearance. What disappearance? He looks at people, see people come, and then people do their job, and people go away. So at that moment, he realizes the stupidity of the entire human exercise. That what are we actually doing? I'm going there, I'm getting her an ice cream, I'm trying to talk to her, she's trying to talk to me, she's playing with me, she's having fun, she's agitated. This will disappear. And I'll go, and she'll of course go away. So here, Jazzy doesn't have the experience of traveling by metro. She comes to the metropolis, but she doesn't have the experience of traveling by metro. So the last line of the last sentence of the novel actually makes us think. She's asked, as she is leaving Paris, she's asked, Jazzy, did you travel by metro? She says, no, I didn't. What have you done? And then she says, I have aged. One day, she says, I have aged. So from being an innocent girl, excited about traveling by the metro, excited about life itself, the fun she's going to have in Paris, when she goes back, it's not that she's going back after 20 years. After a day, as she's going back, as she's ready to go back, she says, I have aged. What does it tell us? It challenges the very idea of these fixed notions through which we approach such characteristics as stupidity and intelligence. Because you can see that Kinu is trying to show how playful even mundane life is, very ordinary life is, everyday activity, going here, going there, doing things, routine things. And to someone who is doing something very serious, this may appear to be ordinary. But this realization that comes, this very young girl, that I have aged. This completely circumvents the parameters through which you examine. Okay, she's a young girl, so she's innocent, she's playful, she's impulsive. So what have we really looked at? On the one hand, we have texts such as Alice in Wonderland, which is not part of European literature, where there is a lot of playfulness and there's a lot of carnivalesque in the Bakhtinian sense, that a lot of things are going on in that universe in Alice in Wonderland. Again, in going back to English literature, to give two examples, we have a poem by Wordsworth called The Idiot Boy. Someone who is not of this world, who is the idiot boy. But such examinations have, when it comes to European literature, you find that they have reached different dimensions, acquired different dimensions. There's a novel by Umberto Eco, How Knowledge Can Be a Sign of Stupidity. There's a novel by Umberto Eco called The Mysterious Flame of Queen Loana. There's a man called Yambo, who is a book curator. One day he wakes up and he finds that he has forgotten everything except what he has read. The only thing he remembers is the books he has read. Different comics, different books. When his wife asks him, "Who are you?" in the hospital, he says, "I am Arthur Gordon Pym," who is a character by Poe. He only remembers, so it becomes a different kind of partial amnesia. He forgets certain things. He cannot just recollect who he was. And he, as much as he tries to recollect who he actually is, or this is his wife, or these are his children, he cannot. And he has that realization. Such a stupid person I am. He's very knowledgeable. He knows so much about books, about book history, about reading, about culture. People around him don't know that much. But what does that weight of knowledge give him? It makes him feel that he is stupid. So, knowledge that cannot be effective in public life, that he realizes, that he has become a vegetable, is useless. Now, I would like to end my discussion by referring to another French philosopher called Roland Barthes. Now, in a book which is published in the 21st century, but it's a series of lectures that Roland Barthes gave in 1977, 78, and 79, called The Nucle. It's a very interesting book called The Nucle. There he recounts an incident. Barthes says that he had once gone to Cannes. So once when he had gone to Cannes, he was walking in a very unmannerly way, and two ladies, they looked at him and they laughed. How is this man walking? He appeared to be, that section is called, in Barthes' lecture, is called On Stupidity. So he says, the ladies looked at me as stupid. And then Barthes writes, with a kind of rejoicing, that I felt so good that they looked at me and they were fixed and I was not. But in their eyes I was stupid, but I was me. So here knowledge that people may look at you as stupid, but how you situate yourself and place yourself and how you look at who you are can be an enabling position, that, okay, I am seen as stupid, but I'm not. This, of course, can happen only when you are in control of the circumstances in the way Barth saw it. So as we can see from Fitbert Douglas to Jazz in the Metro or Hasek, there are different dimensions through which stupidity has found representation in European literature. But one thing is certain, that it is not a one-to-one correspondence, as is commonly perceived, that stupidity is the opposite of intelligence. That stupidity can be the site of very interesting play and philosophical discourse, and can actually be an enabling experience and present a worldview that is otherwise closed. That is something that emerges when you look at these texts from European literature. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. You have given us really some new ideas, some new dimensions, some new ways of looking at the stupidity. It was really engrossing, sir. What was really the aspect of being judgmental, and it also now, sir, we'll move ahead to the questions. We have a question by Sania Hamza, madam. She says, sir, do you think literary text progression, or do they propagate a fixed idea?
No, it is actually a literary text. The words are fixed. That means the words of that novel, say Jazzy in the Metro, they're not going to change. But what can change is the way we read the text. So whereas the words will portray the same thing, but in view of new insights, new critical perceptions, we can always read the text in different ways. So a literary text is not closed, at least not closed to the possibilities of reading.
Yes, sir. We have another question by Sanjukta, madam. She says, sir, what are your views about Shakespeare's clowns and jesters, the idea of stupidity?
Yeah, this is, of course, a very fertile area of Shakespeare. The most famous is Shakespeare's The Fool in King Lear. And during the Renaissance, we know that not only Shakespeare, but throughout Europe, there was this whole aesthetic environment of play, self-criticism, and questioning. So in terms of Shakespeare's theatricality, of course, one dimension is that he used these clowns. That is actually a kind of reduction. He used these clowns and fools to present an alternative view to the dominant discourse that emerged. So whereas King Lear is someone who is lost and who is out of the world he knew, the fool provides in a way succor, and on the other hand he is a kind of a reality checker, that okay, see, the world is not what you thought it was. So there's a functional dimension to the clowns and fools of Shakespeare, but there are also different ways in which we can look at them in terms of not their functionality, not as a foil to what happened, but in terms of the worldviews that emerged and how they presented to us the whole theatrical scene as the site of play.
Dr. Naresh Kumar says, sir, what is the basic difference between stupidity and absurdity?
Yes, absurdity is, as we know, is associated with, in European literature, in European philosophy, with the inability to comprehend the world. We find it in Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, Franz Kafka, Samuel Beckett. We have people who look at this whole question of existence as being something absurd because we can't make sense of it. Stupidity is slightly different. Stupidity is, to quote Robert Musil, it is a kind of perception that the stupid person is deaf to knowledge, that the stupid person cannot receive. There's a problem of reception, cannot really take something that is serious or of an elevated order. So absurdity is something that has to do with the human condition. Stupidity has to do with how that person is received or how that person is seen in society in terms of that person's inability to make sense of the world.
Mr. Vijay says, sir, do you think Thomas Hardy's Wessex novels and the novels by Charles Dickens govern the dialogue of stupidity in European English literature?
Not quite. We find their characters who are, say, not able to come to terms with the reality of their societies. They can't keep pace with that reality. But within that society, even if they are seen as maybe sometimes in Dickens we have that. Sometimes we have them seen as inadequate. One classic example from Dickens is Pumblechook. That Pumblechook is not actually seen as someone stupid, but as someone who is foolish and unable to, a kind of an idiot who is unable to really understand the intricacies. So yes, you can say to some extent we have such characters, but since the focus of Dickens and Hardy, the focus was not on representation of the fool or stupidity or idiocy, they do not occupy the center stage.
Yes, sir. We have another question by Asma Sayedman. She says, Shakespearean fools are some of the most intelligent characters. Sir, then why do you think they are supposed to be called as fools?
Of course, Shakespeare had a particular design in presenting them as fools. The obvious interpretation, or obvious way of looking at them as is that, okay, what the fool can bring to the stage is what the character cannot present, what King Lear cannot present. So the whole idea of the fool, the programming of the fool, someone like Falstaff or the fool, is that you can make the fool say anything and people will ignore it. Oh, he's a fool. So that actually was a kind of license. That the fool doesn't conform. The fool is not expected to be socially correct. The fool is not expected to say things which people would like to hear. The fool will say anything and people will ignore him and say, oh, he's a stupid person or he's a fool. So in that sense, the fool gave Shakespeare the license to present alternative positions on the same subject or issues that occupied the characters.
Mr. Jitendra Singh says, sir, why do human beings abuse oneself or others in a particular situation? Is it stupidity or something else?
Why human beings abuse is, of course, it's something that is not really part of what we are talking about today. I don't know, there are different dimensions as to why such abuse takes place. One, of course, I would say that there is a sense of hierarchy, that when someone abuses oneself, then that sense of hierarchy, that I'm not up to mark, so I can't do anything to anyone else, I'll do it to myself. So if that sense of hierarchy is there, then that will obviously be, I want to abuse someone, so it can be a kind of insecurity that I'm going to abuse that person because other ways don't work. So I think one thing that is common would be the hierarchical understanding of the world and the self, of someone being inferior or superior. That would lead to such responses.
So Vaigo Madam says, sir, is stupidity a part of counterculture?
I would say stupidity is part of culture itself. It has always been there. You go to classical European literature, you go back to the medieval age, you'll always find that it has been part of culture. It has been the other parallel road of culture. So it's not that I think we can use these frames to understand the idea of stupidity or presence of stupidity in society today, counterculture as a frame. But I think this has always been there, and it has been present as a parallel discourse in society.
Mr. Vijay says, sir, do you think that the absurd movement in European literature a part of stupidity?
Not exactly, because absurdity is something that was looked at and addressed by the different writers as a philosophical problem, an existential problem. And as we can see in the case of Camus and Kafka, they have dealt with this idea of stupidity. But we have a lot of existential and absurdist texts where stupidity is not there. In a way, you can say that this is present in a text like Waiting for Godot. The whole idea of life being absurd and the Vladimir and Estragon being stupid persons. But the point in a text like Waiting for Godot is that you don't have the other world, you don't have the non-absurdist world to contrast it with. So yes, we do find the interpenetration of the idea of stupidity in absurdist texts, but it is, we can't say that this is one of the ways to which the absurdist question has been addressed.
Gagandeep Kaur ma'am says, sir, do you think stupidity allows the writers to escape the situation that they are not able to bear?
I think if we say that it is writing as a form of escape, we can say writing is a form of escape, then this is something. Then actually we look at the writer as a historical person, and he or she is using writing to escape. I don't think so. I think when we have a text, then of many subjects, stupidity can be one subject. Whether that is used as a route of escape, I think it is not the only way that a writer may use.
Dr. Nirvarinder Kaur says, sir, in today's world, if anyone says something hilarious, how should we deal with that person?
I think it will depend on the individual and the circumstance. I think the circumstance will be specific and of course be different in different contexts. So there's no formulaic way to look at things. But I think laughter and hilarity are positive values. So I think to respond in the like manner would be the proper approach.
Arunita ma'am says, do monotony and existentialist attitude reflect the absurdity in modernist novels?
No, why absurdity became or continues to occupy the writers then and now is not necessarily to do with monotony. That, of course, could be one of the ways, the inexplicable nature of existence, that existence cannot be explained, and therefore we have to find out ways through which we can come to terms with it. One monotony, of course, is one of the issues that we find in poets like Baudelaire and Eliot. So yes, it is one of the themes. Whether it translates into the question of absurdity, we cannot find a parallel always, but in some cases that can be possible.
Mr. J.P. Gohil says, sir, do you think that the writers balance ideology by creating stupid as well as intelligent characters?
Yeah, I think in particular texts that is done. That you have two different kinds of characters. One is stupid and the other. But you see, if you have such straight characters and such closed characters, that here is a stupid person and here is an intelligent person, then I think the text won't really work out. There must be a condition of play, a kind of elasticity which would enable the stupid and the idea of the intelligent person to swap places. And then only I think it will work. So if you go to Shakespeare's King Lear, the fool is intelligent and the fool is the fool. And King Lear is intelligent and King Lear is also foolish. So I think that parallel switching is possible. That is why it works out. But if we have fixed characters and then say, okay, this is a stupid person, remains stupid throughout, and this is intelligent, then I think the text will be quite closed.
Mr. Chandrakant says, sir, do you think the nature of stupidity is contextual?
Yeah, of course. I think it is something that is to be seen in particular contexts. And although we have more or less a general idea that stupidity is lack of intelligence, but again, depending on the context, that perception is going to change and alter. Yes, it's context specific.
Chitra Dasgupta madam says, sir, do you think the concept of stupidity might have influenced the modern European literature from the Shakespearean style of fools?
In a way, yes, but Shakespeare was also part of a tradition of what when he used these characters, he was also actually responding to an existing tradition, and so he was part of a cultural inheritance that came from Europe, and we know that many Shakespearean characters are European, and that tradition is there. Of course, we from Shakespeare to Goethe to Pushkin to Dostoevsky and to the modern writers of the 20th century, we find that tradition to be there. Of course, they draw on that tradition as they make their texts.
Mr. Satyajit says, sir, how do you see the idea of stupidity in the writings of Luigi Pirandello?
Pirandello is associated with the theatre of the grotesque, not quite in the frame that we have. He was again looking at the question of existence, but in a very different way. That he was looking at the question of play. So when we have the representation of grotesque in Pirandello, in his plays, in his writings, that doesn't quite fit the frame of because stupidity doesn't really work as a matrix in Pirandello's argument, although he is looking at issues that writers dealing with stupidity have looked at. But then he adopted a different aesthetic framework.
Mr. Ali says, sir, is it necessary to add some sort of stupidity in any kind of writing?
No. That will entirely depend on how a writer goes about writing. There's no such thing as necessary or unnecessary.
Okay, so we'll take up one last question now. Rasmi Verma madam says, sir, do you think that the enlightened people are initially ridiculed as stupid by common man?
Yeah, that has happened. In fact, in their dialectic of enlightenment, Adorno and Horkheimer talk about this. They say that there's a perception that the whole idea of enlightenment as a kind of progress, intellectual progress, that is not as simple as it sounds or as elevated as it is, because people don't look at it as something to be good or something rewarding. So in that sense, there is that reverse response that this is something that we find in their book, Adorno and Horkheimer talking about.
Okay, sir, we have come to the end of the session, and sir, all I can say is that you have given us some serious food for thought. You have, in a way, enlightened us with your brilliant talk, and also you have given us some new aspects to look at the idea of stupidity. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And to all my dear participants, the feedback form will be available half an hour after the end of the lecture. Thank you once again, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.